Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Career Journey. I'm your host, Dr. Brittany Avila. Today's guest is Alison Donaghey, and this one is a fantastic ride from her wanting to be a cat burglar when she was small to kind of starting her own business based off of a boyfriend's kind of business model. Now she writes books and has programs built around self-worth. She mentioned she's even wanting to write a series with her son for Netflix. Really, her story is one about following your gut and your instinct and using that to guide your career decisions and how to follow through on some of your more crazy ideas that you might have and to make them actually successful as she has done. So please enjoy Alison Donaghey. Hey everyone, welcome to the Career Journey podcast, where we explore exciting careers and how to get them from the people who've lived it. I'm your host, Dr. Brittany Avila. Thank you for tuning in and enjoy. I feel like now, especially nowadays, they tend to think it's like a linear path. Like you go to school, you get a job, that's it. And
Right.
I like to just kind of show them by stories that, exactly what it looks like. So it's basically just your story.
About all my different jobs.
Everything.
Okay. Oh, this will be fun.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's I've done talks at the high school, and
Okay.
there's that conception that I'm just going to go to get a degree and people will just knock on my door to give me a job. And then
Yeah.
if they're like, I want to be a nurse. I said, have you spent any time in the nursing industry? Well, no, but that's what I want to do.
Yeah. And that's something we talked about a lot on this podcast is you might think you know what you want to do, and then you get experience in it. And all of a sudden that's not at all what you wanted to do. And not having any experience can be very detrimental.
Yeah, I did that with criminology.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah.
I wanted to do like criminal profiling and stuff. It's really big now. Everybody kind of wants to do it.
Mm-hmm.
And then I kind of actually met with some people in the field and looked into it. And I was like, oh, that's not at all what I want to do.
Mm-hmm.
And moved. I switched my career path a bunch of times too, but
Yeah, I think healthy people do. There are some fortunate people who are like 5 years old. They know they want to be a doctor and they're going to be a doctor and that's all there is to it. And they become a doctor and they love it.
right.
But the rest of us have to muddle our way through.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I love what you said about thinking that people are just going to come knocking once you get your bachelor's degree. I think that's like a leftover misconception because it used to be true that there were so few people getting college degrees that jobs would kind of knock on your door and be waiting for you. And now it's just everybody goes. And so you need something else. You need skills or experience or something that sets you apart.
Yeah. Yeah. Determination, ambition, that go-get-itness.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So it's pretty easy. We usually just start from the very beginning. So you were talking about kind of those people that already knew what they wanted to do, but what did you want to do when you were a child? Or did you even think about it?
I actually wanted to be a cat burglar.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Awesome.
When I was little, I don't know how I came across this. There was that I did not because I wanted to steal things, because I don't even know if I understood the concept of that then, but I just thought it was that really cool sneaking around, going into places you weren't supposed to be in. And so I just really loved that breaking those boundaries and going, asking those questions, doing those things that average people wouldn't do. And then I said it to my teacher and she got so mad at me. She put me in the corner and I'm like, I don't understand what's wrong here. Right. But, yeah, I always thought it would be just cool to do.
Well, I'm interested to hear the rest of your career path because I like to try to find links between what people wanted to be as a child to what they're doing now. And I'm wondering if there's any links to kind of cat burglaring and I can even say that word and what you do now.
It works.
Yeah. So where did it morph after that? So you wanted to be a cat burglar. Obviously that wasn't going to work
Yes, and then
society-wise.
my first illustrious career was at McDonald's. When I was 15, I moved back to Ontario because I'm in Canada, and to live with my dad. And so he let me get a summer job, and which I was surprised at because he was sort of like women shouldn't work. And
Mhm.
so got a job at McDonald's, and I loved working. I just loved it. And then my dad passed away, so then I had to move back to British Columbia, which is on the other side of Canada. And
Mhm.
I wasn't allowed to work at that age, so I had to wait another year, and then I went to work at McDonald's. But I grew bored of it quite quickly,
Mhm.
and so that ended before too long. And then we were in a recession, and there was no jobs to be had, especially for young, unskilled people. And so I don't think I had another job then until the end of high school.
Mm,
Mhm.
and what did you do at the end of high school?
I moved back to Ontario thinking that would solve all my problems, all of my unhappiness, right? Because I was very unhappy living where I was living in British Columbia. And so then I did, the typical kind of jobs. I worked at a donut shop. I got a job where I was a dance instructor. I was teaching ballroom and nightclub dancing. I had no skill set. Uh, but there was an ad in the paper, and I thought, oh, that'll be fun. Like, I know how to dance, like, dance. And
Mhm.
so it was a 4-week training thing. They taught us how to teach beginner foxtrot, polka, tango, rumba, I don't know what else. And it was fun, but the boss was an idiot. Like, he was just, he got me into the sales end of it, and he said, I'm not telling you have to sleep with this person to sign them up, but you better sign them up.
Oh,
And
wow.
right, and I was just like, I don't, no, I think I'm gonna move away
Not
from
do
that.
that.
Yeah, and these things happen in the workforce. I'm not condoning it, but we certainly get to learn our mettle and what we're worth and what we're willing to put up with.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and from there, I worked at record stores and just all of these kind of minimum wage dead end jobs, and then I found out I was pregnant. So that kind of changed everything after that. Hmm.
And were you thinking about careers aside from these smaller jobs during that time, or was it only once you got pregnant that you started thinking maybe more long term?
I was looking into going to university because I was really attracted to law, cat
Mhm.
burglar, and so I thought it would be really interesting to get into that. Yeah, I figure, I don't know, the solving of the problems, the finding the loopholes. I'd taken a law in high school, and I was very good at it, and I thought it might be a fun thing to do. But then when I got pregnant, and my parents at that point, my mom and stepdad were living in BC still, so I ended up traveling back to BC and had my son there. And then the prospects of school at that time with a child were challenging at best.
Right.
Hmm. Yeah.
And so what was your kind of plan, or what were you doing at that time when you
I ended up working at a bank, which I
Mhm.
realized in a hurry I did not like. I did not like working with a variety of women. I that like a predominantly female job site. I just found it got really catty, and I
Mhm.
was low man on the totem pole, so I ended up suffering a lot of abuse
Okay.
there. And I was on welfare still at the time, trying to make ends meet with my son. And my social worker told me that they would cut me off welfare, and I'd lose my quit kid if I quit my job. And I went home every day for a year and a half and cried. It was horrible. Yeah. And my management wouldn't do anything. They're like, well, you can't quit. So I don't know why you're complaining.
Oh,
And
wow.
so it was nasty. It was ugly. And I'm 51. So we have to remember in context, this was 30 years ago. And
Okay.
so workplace etiquette was a little bit different. I hope it was different back then.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then I worked as an esthetician, and totally unlicensed and unschooled. And then I realized I'm never gonna be able to get off welfare. I'm never gonna be able to put food on the table on my own merits. And so I thought I would go back to school, and then I went back for criminology. I worked at a federal halfway house, and I realized that that institution is just so broken, and if I stayed in it, I would become broken. And I just did not like seeing so many aspects of the way
Right.
things were run, the way people were treated. It just felt really out of sync with who I was. And so then I went back and I got sociology and psychology, thinking, I'll get a real job when I'm done all of this. And then I moved in with a guy, because there's always a guy, right? And at this time, I'm working 3 jobs, like retail jobs, going to
Mhm.
school full time. And then I met Bob, and he had a painting company. And so he taught me how to paint.
Oh,
And
wow.
he said, yeah, a girlfriend of mine's going to learn how to paint, and you'll be able to see your kid more often. I was like, I don't even care what you want me to do. I will do it. If I get to see my kid, I will do it.
Yeah.
And then he relapsed into drug addiction the weekend I moved in with him. And it was another 6 years of absolute chaos, just trying to not end up with things in the pawn shop.
Yeah.
And I couldn't really work, because if I would leave, he would pawn everything that we owned, and it became a very ugly time. And then he passed away. I went back to school to finish my degree, and I started my house painting company.
Wow. So you
Yeah,
started your own after all of that?
I did. I just thought, well, how hard could it be? The guys are doing it. Like, it's, he
Right.
was a drug addict, and he was somehow figuring it out, right? It's like craving the drugs. Not, and I'm please know I am not diminishing the capabilities of people because they're drug addicts, but his mind was always elsewhere. His mind was always on the next score, and yet he
Right.
was still able to make this business fly somehow, and possibly because I was doing a lot of the work. To be honest.
Right.
Yeah. And so I thought, well, I'll do it for a year until I finish my education, and I'll figure out what I really want to do. And so I did it. I went through university, finished my last year. I went to the mainland. I got a certificate to teach English as a second language. I moved to Italy with my son and taught English there for 6 months. And then I got this really weird environmental poisoning, and I had to come back, but I was still running the painting company with a staff member here. And so I just came back into the painting world.
Wow.
Hmm.
Okay, I'm going to back up a little bit twice, because there's a few things I want you to expand on
Yeah.
for us. First, I'm going to back way up to that job at the bank and
Mhm.
how horrific that sounded. Can you walk me through the process of what it was like deciding to actually leave or being able to leave? You said you were kind of stuck in it. So how did you
Mhm.
end up moving away from that job?
I ended up going in for one of my social worker appointments, and it was a new woman. I guess she was taking over caseload because my regular woman was sick, and
Mhm.
so I go into her office, and she's like, "So you're working at a bank? That's so good!" And I started crying, and she went, "What is wrong?" And so I started telling her the things that were happening at the job site, and she was just like, "You are not going back there, not for one more day." And so if it wasn't for her, I may still have ended up there. I may have been like, probably would have turned into an alcoholic or something, just to cope with
Yeah,
that level of abuse and unhappiness. And it taught me so much about how having the right people in your life impacts the trajectory of your life.
right. Just one circumstance, even just having someone be sick, and then it
Yeah.
changes the whole course of your life.
It totally did. And then she actually advocated to get my case transferred to her. And she was tremendous. She was really, really wonderful. And she kept wanting to set me up with her son, which may have been a conflict of interest. However,
Yeah,
I was fine with that.
with everything else, yeah.
Yeah, it was probably better than the male social worker I had that just thought I should sleep with him and to continue getting
Right.
benefits. And so, like, but again, different time, right? The boundaries were different. The what we expected was different.
Right.
Hmm.
What people could get away with was different too, I think.
Yeah, yeah, totally. And it was just more of an accepted, okay, yeah, this is going to happen, right? Like
Yeah,
at that point in my life and the experiences that I had, it was just like, okay, this is going to happen. I'll just deal with it, and I will move on, or I will figure out a way around it. And I was fortunate that I probably didn't come across anybody who was violent around it,
right.
in the workplace. Outside of the workplace, this is a different story. Personal lives, ooh, yuck.
Ugh. And then the other place I wanted to go explore was you starting your own painting company. So
Mhm.
what goes into starting your own company in that way? What did you do? What did you overcome? How did you make that decision?
I made the decision because I had to put food on the table. Really,
Yeah.
that was my big why. I wanted to feed my kid, and I had no idea how great my life could become through that decision, because I ended up with a truly beautiful life. And my son now works for my company and he runs all of my crews and he'll eventually take it over. So it's morphed into something really tremendous. But the decision was I have to do something. And I wanted something with some flexibility. I realized at that point I did not make a good employee, not because
Mhm.
I was a bad worker, but because I wanted to fix things. And my bosses were like, no, this is how it's done. I'm like, but it could be better. Like if we just tweak this, no, just do the job. And
Right.
so I realized I would end up getting super frustrated around that. And I had the equipment after I got it all out of the pawn shop. I had the equipment and I had a van. And so it was just a matter of naming the company and getting going. And I was so naive, so blissfully ignorant about the ways of business. Like I actually thought I was good at business until the recession hit. And
Yeah.
then I was like, oh my God, I am not good at business at all. I've been coasting on the economy. And now that the economy's tanked, I have to figure out what business is all about. And so I ended up writing a business book and to really start pulling it all together.
And were you nervous to start this company? Was there anxiety around it, or was it pretty much just, I have to get this done, so it's got to be done?
It was pretty much I have to get this done. And I'd already had a couple of contacts from when Bob was still alive. And
Hmm.
for the last year of his life, I'd sort of been taking over some of those relationship building things. Not that he had great locations. We were painting some pretty scummy, slummy places.
Yeah.
But we did have one government contract, and me and the guy got along really well. And he sort of took me under his wing and helped me. Again, it's those people along the way that makes it breaks it.
Yeah.
But I did have a lot of feelings of inadequacy. And I remember one time I was at a gas pump and this great sports car pulled up in front of me to get gas. And this beautiful woman stepped out of it. And here I am in my bandana and my paint clothes. And I probably had paint all over my face and my old clunky rusted out van. And I'm pumping gas like meekly. And then I had the epiphany that I hire people, I help people pay their rent and feed their children. And I give them a safe place to work where they are respected. And I kind of went, oh, yeah, check me out. And then the woman walked past me as she was going in the store and she's like, is this your company? And I said, yeah. She's like, go for you. Like she was so supportive. And so it was just this beautiful bow at the top of the package of my realization. And I will always be grateful to her for those words of encouragement because I was feeling quite inadequate when I first saw her and making that comparing insides to outsides.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And then you mentioned how you were kind of blissfully unaware of how business works, which I feel like anyone starting their own business kind of probably feels that way.
Yeah.
Do you think that helped you in any way to not fully know what you were getting into?
Oh my God. Yes. And I think that holds true with so many things. You know, Bob, when he was in addiction, he went to NA and he said the first time he went through it like a rock star. The second, when he relapsed, he knew all the work that was involved and he was a little bit
Mhm.
like, oh God, I don't want to do the 12 steps again. And so that kept postponing him cleaning and getting clean and getting clean. And so I think it's the same with business. I just started another business a few years ago and knowing all of the pitfalls have made me more cautious than I was before.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you mentioned that you wrote a book on business when you were kind of figuring it out. Can you tell me more about that?
Yeah, it was actually a couple of years ago, and people were like, how were you able to make your business different? And so I really think as business owners, we can use our business to change the world.
Mhm.
Because it's those touch points that we have. When I think about the touch points I had with strangers and how it impacted me, as an employer, I can have those touch points with my staff, my customers, my community, and that ripples out. And I believe I have changed the way people look at house painters in the town that I live in. It's changed the way some of the other companies do business because I've raised the bar. And I think as a result of that, it's rippled into positive things in the world. And so I talk about those four pillars: self, community, staff, and customers in the book. And how do we appreciate and interact?
And how did you decide to start writing that book?
I met a woman at an event and she helped people write books. And I was going to write another book, and I think I wish I had written about the book, not because my book isn't good, but I really wanted to get more into the critical thinking, the personal accountability. That was the book I wanted to write,
Yeah.
but there was so much pressure on putting something out, and so I went with what I knew, and it's been great. People have been impacted positively, but it's yet one more lesson in my stream of lessons about
Hmm.
staying in my lane and not getting so influenced by people around me.
Yeah. I do
Mhm.
love the theme of all these people that have kind of come in and helped elevate you to another position,
Yeah.
even if maybe you need to listen to your own inner voice a little bit more.
Yeah. Well, and I think when we're feeling like we lack worth, um, because now I do work with worthiness with my second company, and I think when we can get worth one of two ways. We can get it internally. I am okay regardless of what you are doing or saying.
Hmm.
That's a really healthy way of getting worth. It allows us to stay in this place of neutrality on what you're doing. The other way is to get it externally. I need you to be, see, do, say something to make me feel good about myself.
Right.
And then I'm always at the mercy of you in order for me to feel good. And
Yeah.
so, right. And so I was really needing at times that external validation, somebody actually looking at me and saying, whoa, you did a really good job there, because I had no idea I was doing a good job. I was so frantic, so trying to make it work. I had 18 staff, and somebody said to me one time, when are you going to get a real job? And I went, "Oh, what?" Like, I don't understand what you're saying right now. And it was a huge blow. It came out of left field from somebody I respected, and I thought they respected me. And so there are times that we still can stay with internal worth, but it's nice to have those people that don't even know they're doing it, shining light on the fact that, yeah, I'm in the right lane.
Yeah, it sometimes gets really easy to get lost in ourselves and not kind of step back and look at that bigger picture.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. So, so easy.
So, was there anything specific you did to grow that first business of your painting business where you probably started small, I'm assuming, right? Was it just you in the beginning, or did you
Yeah,
already
it
have a
was.
crew?
And then I talked to a client one time who was an electrician, and I was painting his rental properties. And I said, like, you're an electrician, I'm a painter, like, you make more an hour than me, but really, how were you able to afford all of this stuff? He goes, you got to get staff.
Yeah.
You will never get ahead if it's only you working in this industry. And so I went, okay. So I started getting staff, and I started getting more jobs, and really trying to figure out how to make all of that work. And then eventually I just became a manager and less of a painter. And although I have to say, I think I prefer the painting over the
Oh,
managing.
yeah? I was just gonna ask what the differences are.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because when you're painting a house, you go into a house and it's ugly, and you put this beautiful color on the wall and it looks beautiful. Everything's clean again. The customer comes in, they're happy. Your job starts, continues, finishes. You're on to another job. When you're managing, I think it's a lot like dusting. It's just a never-ending task.
Right.
With very little reward. And I have some short term gratification need, and I don't get it so much in managing.
Right.
But I do end up with a lot of freedom in my life, and I've been able to travel, and I've gone to a lot of really beautiful places in the world, and my son's been able to come with me. And so, it's a trade off.
I know, I always talk about the difference of, like, 9 to 5 jobs where you get to go home when you're done and kinda turn it off, and then
Hmm.
have your own personal life, or, like a career I'm in where I could literally work 24 hours a day, 7 days a week if I wanted to, because they would let me, right? And so you have to be kinda your own governor.
Hmm. Yeah, and I gave up a lot. I gave up like my personal life. I didn't cultivate relationships because I was busy working. I remember dating a guy one time, and he said to me, he's like, "Look, if you don't take at least Sundays off every week so we can hang out together, this is not going to work." And I went, I don't understand what you're saying. You want me to take a day off? What? Like, I've been going so hard for so long, taking a day off didn't even occur to me.
Yeah.
And I was probably working on the reg 12 hours a day, and then probably 8 hours a day on weekends. And it just didn't occur to me to do otherwise. I didn't want to go back on welfare. So I was focused. And it took me a long time to realize, oh my God, I'm doing okay. I can breathe. I have space. The relationship didn't work, but I
Yeah.
learned the importance of taking time off. Yeah.
And earlier you mentioned you went to like Italy and you kind of, it doesn't sound like you exactly took a break from your painting business, but you were able to do other stuff. What was that like? Were you kind of still managing from afar? Did you just completely take a break? What happened
Yeah,
there?
no, I was still managing from there. I had a woman working with me, and she'd been working with me for about a year prior. And so we thought we would see how this goes. And if I stayed away, I would then give her the business. And if I came back, then depending on how long I was gone, we'd figure it out. But it was pretty much daily. She would be like, well, I looked at this job and I don't know how to price it. And so then I'd have to figure it out. So I was still running it from
Right.
elsewhere. And it was a little bit more difficult because I wasn't actually on site to troubleshoot some of these things. And then when I came back, she felt that she should have been an equal partner at that time. And yet she hadn't really stepped into that role.
Right.
So that was challenging because we had become friends, and that ended up, we went our separate ways. But that is the nature of business, right? And somebody said to me, business is personal until it goes sideways and then it becomes business.
Right.
So, and I've really
Good way to
tried
look
to,
at it.
yeah, I've tried to hold on to that. I've tried to really make my business personal. And I think that's what set me apart from the other companies in town is my amount of caring that I have for my customers. And sometimes that means I have to say no to a job because there's no integrity in taking a job that shouldn't be yours. And
Yeah.
mhm, yeah.
Was it difficult to approach that conversation with that particular person about trying to let them go or
Yeah, it is really hard. She was very resistant. At that point, she'd had control over the bank account, and she went away. She left me with no money, and she's like, "Yeah, we'll deal with it when we get back." Well, it wasn't a big deal to her because she had no bills. She was married, and so she didn't really need the income. And so I went into the bank. I explained the situation, and I ended up taking out money, like what I felt was a fair money based on the work that I was doing. And she came back and lost her mind.
oh
And
wow.
so I paid her out, and that was the end of it. And we haven't spoken since. So, and it happens, and it's unfortunate because I really cared about her as a human being, but I could not share my business with somebody who wasn't contributing. And then it was really interesting because, the lessons along the way, right? There was one customer that we painted for them and for their friends, and like they lived in a community, and we got passed around a lot in this community. And when she heard about it, she phoned me up and she said, I think it was a really good call because you're friendly and she's familiar, and you
Mhm.
can't be familiar when you're in business.
Yeah.
And it changed a lot of how I saw my relationship with my clients, and it changed the respect level too because we're not friends. I'm providing them a service, and there's a difference. So all those little lessons along the way. Yeah.
And then let's talk through, you said you've been saying that you started a second business. Do you
Mhm.
mind telling us what that is and how you came across starting that one?
Yeah, it's called Domino Thinking, and it started, I'd given a speech about how I'd had an experience when I was in school about a teacher telling me that it was okay that a boy hit me because he liked me. And I at that time, I knew it was wrong. If the teacher didn't know it was wrong, I knew it was wrong. And,
Yeah.
because I was really clear, my parents were the only people that were allowed to hit me. And things that don't really get said these days. And then I had a house party, and a bunch of people showed up, and there was probably about 10 of them, and they were young, and this woman was getting hit on by this guy, and she couldn't make it stop. And and so I went over and I interrupted, and I'm like, I don't think she's into you the way you think she's into you. And I was just like, can we all have a conversation here around this? And she sort of left, and she came back and she's like, I didn't know how to make it stop. And I'm thinking, we have not come along as far as we think we have. And I think it's an important
Definitely.
conversation. So after that, people were like, oh my God, I want to hear more about this. And can you speak here? And can you do this? And how do I do this? And so I started a podcast, and then that morphed into what I do now. And I work with people around worthiness. So I have a program that helps people understand where their worth is coming from and to get it in a healthy way, because it's the foundation of everything. We can't be vulnerable and if our worth isn't intact, because then it's to manipulation. I'm going to
Mhm.
be vulnerable with you so that you do A, B, or C for me.
Right.
Yeah.
And you
So
can't stand up for yourself without feeling self-worth either.
yeah, or and when you do, it is you have to take somebody down in order to stand up, and that's not a healthy way. It's not sustainable, and I'm sure it doesn't make most people's hearts sing.
Right.
So, uh, it's so interesting watching when people understand it and that light bulb goes off, their lives are changed. It's such a I feel so honored to have the experience with people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you mentioned in the very beginning you were kind of talking to people about these types of things, and then people started to reach out to you to ask you how they could do it, or
Mhm.
where were you, or how were you kind of communicating this stuff where people started reaching out to you? Were you already putting stuff out there, putting kind of content out there, or was it all word of mouth? Like, how did you kind of get people to come to you?
It was a variety of sort of throwing spaghetti at the wall. I did some speaking. I have been fortunate enough to be on panels in certain conferences, and that has helped people come forward. My podcast, some people have found me through there. I've done some free webinars, masterclasses online about worthiness. Where does it come from? So it just, yeah, a variety of different places. And but it is really interesting because people, when they hear me talk about it, they're like, oh, I know somebody who really needs to take this program. I'm like, oh,
Right.
you sure it's not you? It's because, right, it's hard for us to see ourselves in this light until something happens. It's hard for that light bulb to go off and go, whoa, that was me just making that mess in my life, wasn't it? It wasn't that other person. And
Right.
there needs to be a level of awareness for us to own our part in something. And then when we own our part in something, then we want to understand it.
And so your business model for this kind of business is, it seems pretty varied because you have a podcast,
Yeah.
webinars, speaking engagements. How do you approach that type of business model, and knowing that you're going to be doing different types of things, or how do you monetize like doing a webinar or something like that? How do you transition that into a business?
Well, I offer an 8-week program, and so that's a paid
Nice.
program. Yeah. And so there's different ways people can sign up for it. They can do a self-guided one, which I don't think is ideal, but some people function really well that way. So I wanted it to be an option. Or we can do it in small groups, or we can do one-on-one. And obviously the price reflects the amount of time that I'm required to be there. And it's 8 weeks. And that's it. Right. And that's the part that people have a hard time with, because especially when I'm talking to other business owners, other coaches, I don't classify myself as a coach, but they're just like, well, no, you have to upsell them at the end, and you have to sell them you got a 3-year coaching. And I'm like, what? No, I'd be making them a victim at that point. And take my stuff and go. And if you need to reach out and ask questions, definitely come back and ask the questions, but don't rely on me, because now you're giving me your worth. And
Right.
so it's an interesting model, to say the least. And because it's not my primary source of income, it's more of if something comes up, I do it.
Right. And so you're still operating the two businesses, right? You still have the painting business as well.
Yeah. And I was, this is the whole entrepreneur thing, right? I've created a color education system. So I
Mhm.
help people understand how to pick colors for their homes, so they're not relying on other people to tell them what they like. And
Nice.
yeah, and it's 100% success rate. It's been absolutely incredible. And it leaves my opinion out of it.
Right.
Because if it was up to me, people would have, white walls, and not everybody likes white walls. And so it allows people to step into that their own color palette in a way that no other program I've ever come across has allowed people to do it.
For
But that's
sure.
that
I
thing
could
yeah, right. When you're engaged in what you're doing, when you really understand that relationship that you're having with the person on the other end of what you're doing, it's this constant searching for solutions to just keep making it better, staying ahead of that curve, not because you want to make more money, because that in and of itself is not really a motivator. Sure, when I started my house painting company, I wanted to make more money, but it wasn't
yeah.
about making more money. It was about putting food on the table. It's about giving my son a better life. And I needed money to do that. And so, there's just, I don't know, I think when we're invested in being part of the solution
Mhm.
in whatever it is that we're doing, we will naturally evolve into these other things that we do.
Right. I love that way of framing it, because I always try to tell people, search for the problem that you want to solve.
Yeah.
So students right now, I've found that they get kind of lost. They don't know exactly what they want to do or what they're supposed to do. And they don't really know how to navigate where to go to look
Mhm.
for that information. And so I usually try to say, exactly what you're saying, you need to be part of the solution. What problem is it that you're looking to solve?
Yeah.
What part of that solution do you want to be?
I love that. It's a beautiful way of putting it, especially because as we're going through the system, we are constantly being told what to do.
Yeah.
Be here at this time, learn this, read this book, do this, do that.
Yes.
You have to take this in order to graduate. I don't care if you don't like it, you have to take it. I've actually created an entire education model as well.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, which is different, of course, than anything else that's out there.
Yeah.
But it's that because I see these problems, and like you say, I want solutions to these problems,
Yeah.
and it may be something I never do anything with, but at least I feel like energetically I'm putting a solution out there.
Yeah, no, I would love to see that plan,
Yeah.
because it's exactly what you're saying is we have this kind of idea, especially I know you're in Canada, but in the States, it's very rigid. It's, you take these tests, you pass these tests, you go on to school. Okay, well, what do you do after that? Well, now I don't know what job I need to get. So now I just need to go to graduate school. I have hundreds of students that pass through my office that are like, well, I need to go to graduate school. How do I get there? And I'm like, well, what do you want
Mhm.
to do when you're done? They're like, I don't know. I just need graduate school. And I'm like, well, it doesn't work that way, because you could go get your PhD and then be overqualified for whatever you're actually wanting to do, or you could go into the
Mhm.
wrong one and suffer kind of mental health
Yeah.
issues, from it, and not be happy. And, you kind of need to focus on that end goal, but it's just been so ingrained that you do this to get that. You get the bachelor's, you get the master's, you get the PhD, and
Yeah.
people forget why they're doing that stuff now. And so, yeah, I'd
Mhm.
be very interested to see a new education model that's not like that.
Yeah, well, I will definitely share it with you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I also think it should be mandatory for people to, then there should be funding for it. Like where there's funding for people to go to school,
Mhm.
right? Schools get funded. And so there should be a stipend of that allows people to go to like a third world country
Yeah.
where you don't speak the language and you have to be there for a month and you have to figure it out. The reliance on yourself and the confidence that is built from something like that. And I know it's not practical, but
Yeah.
there is a component. I have learned more from traveling to countries where I don't speak the language than any self-help book I've ever read,
Right.
you
And
know?
I know there are programs out there that help finance or help figure out, like, gap years now. Like,
Yeah.
gap years are starting to be, it's still in its infancy, but they're starting to be seen as a better alternative even, whereas
Mhm.
I think before it was kind of taboo to take a gap year. Now there's programs that encourage students to take a gap year and to do something productive with that gap year, go to another country, help out in a certain way, or do something else, and they kind of get rewarded for that.
Mhm.
So I wish there was more of those programs, but they're out
Oh,
there.
yeah. I think there's a company too called Work Abroad, and it
Mhm.
allows people, like, even in corporate, to talk to your boss and just say, "Hey, can I do this on the road?" And you get to travel and do
Oh,
all of
wow.
this other stuff, and so that creates a different sort of work experience, and the value that they're finding that brings to their actual job because they're having this, experience
Yeah.
it's amazing, and they can't get it any other way, and so when we realize that education happens beyond just the classroom, how do we start incorporating that? How do we blend and see things differently? Working at the Federal Halfway House was a huge eye opener for me.
Right.
It was totally not what they were teaching me at school.
No, and there's so much more to be learned outside of school. That's something
Yeah.
I've been focused on right now with kind of this emergency remote teaching and all these things that people are going through right now, where I'm just like, the content of our courses is not all that matters right now. Like, we can be
Mhm.
teaching resilience or how to survive a pandemic or,
Yeah.
how to take care of your mental health during a stressful time. And there's other things that we could be teaching that are just as valuable to learning and education than just content.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that practical life blending of it, I think is super, super important. And I believe there's a place for both, for sure.
Mhm.
I believe that we have to learn things. School's good. We have to learn things.
Yeah.
And yet perhaps we don't have to learn things the way that they've always been taught. And
Yeah.
it's like you're saying, and now we're in a situation we are forced to now consider things differently. And I think there's a lot of really beautiful things that can come from that.
Yeah. And teaching only to a certain way, like having one correct answer for everything, doesn't really help people in careers or in jobs. Like just your story in general is adapting and resilience and navigating and finding your own way through things. And you can't do that if you're just lost in the standardized testing world.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and you guys have that way worse down in the States than we
Yeah,
do here.
that's
So we
true.
don't have that, but down there, I've talked to some and people are just like, "I'm defined by my ability to do that test."
Mhm.
And what what a short change, like, the society as a whole suffers from that, right?
Oh, yeah.
Because we can all bring such different, beautiful things to the table if we're not being judged by a score.
When you see it in the student population, like the college students now have the highest anxiety and depression of any generation before, at least in the US.
Mhm.
And there's been several theories of to why that is, but one thing that I think is just when you're defined by that score, there's a lot of anxiety around that because that score doesn't really tell you how intelligent you are. It doesn't tell you how creative you are. It doesn't tell you how good you are at a future career. But
Mhm.
students are led to believe that it does. I do a lot of work in higher education, just convincing students that they're smart enough and that it's okay if they, don't
Yeah.
get a perfect score on an exam as long as they're learning and growing. And that idea that no, it has to be perfect and it has to be perfect the first time is kind of damaging.
Mhm. Well, and there's no resilience being taught at the younger levels.
No.
Right? I was talking to some at my Pilates class, and, the instructor was talking about how there was a girl that was mean to his daughter, and, the parents all now are getting involved, and he's like, "Your daughter can't treat," and I'm like, "But you don't get to say how that other girl behaves. You don't.
Yeah.
All you do is get to manage your own daughter and help her understand how she's behaving."
Yeah. And that's
But
something I notice in parenting circles is how much do you let your child figure it out themselves. So when they're
Mhm.
fighting on a playground, there's this urge to go in and take care of it and like remove
Yeah.
them and say stop. But there's this idea, especially now, I think it's kind of coming back. It used to be there and then it kind of went away, that we need to let them fight it out themselves or figure it out themselves because
Mhm.
honestly, it's just exactly like your business on self-worth. They can't find their self-worth if we're constantly defining it for them.
Yeah.
Uh,
Well, and by solving your problem, I'm telling you, you're not smart enough to solve it on your own,
exactly.
right?
Or
How
that you don't need
victimizing is
to,
that? Yeah.
or that somebody's going to come in and solve it for you and you don't learn that resilience, you don't learn that standing up for yourself and all those things you need.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. I know. It's all intertwined. All of it. All of it.
So where do you see you have kind of all these different trajectories? I hear, the painting business, the self-worth business, even ideas on education. Where do you think you might be going kind of in your future? Is it no idea?
I'm entertaining the idea of designing furniture.
Oh yeah? Nice.
Yeah. I designed and built my house 7 years, 8 years ago now, and I loved that experience. And a friend of mine is a metal worker, and he is a very high-end carpenter. He was trained in Japan in all of these really fancy kind of ways. And we were going to start building furniture together. And then, life happened. But I would love to start getting into designing that. I think I would need to see somebody else more skilled than me to put it together
Yeah.
because I'd be lucky if I could make a box. And but I love the idea of mixing the natural with the man-made and doing that sort of thing. And so I think that might be kind of a fun side hustle to do with somebody. And so I'm looking at that
That's exciting.
presently. And my son and I, we wrote a series that we would love to see show up on Netflix.
Oh, wow.
And so, it's just about I think for anybody, if it feels like it's something you want to do, just do it. And just try, maybe it's going to create a whole new path for you, and maybe it's going to become a hobby, and maybe you're going to realize this isn't what I want. So when I talk to kids at high school about career, and we were talking about it, I want to be a nurse, but they've never shadowed a nurse. And then they get into it and they go, oh my God, like a friend of mine, she got into nursing. She wanted to be a doctor. She didn't think she could do all the schooling, so she stayed as a nurse. And then I said to her, oh my God, nurses have it hard, right? Like, nurses are quite unhappy often in their profession because of the shift work and the abuse and all of that. You know this, right?
Especially
She's like,
right
oh,
now.
it'll be, yeah, right. She's like, it'll be fine. It'll be fine. And then a year after she worked in the industry, she was doing some contract nursing, and she came back and she was like, oh my God, let me tell you how much this job sucks. And I'm like, did you think the job was going to change because you got a job in that industry? It's not going to change.
Right.
And so you either accept the parameters of that job or you move on. And so I suggest to these kids, shadow people in the industry you think you might want to work in, and ask them what they hate about their job.
Right.
And if you can live with what they hate, it might be a good job for you.
And it's also just as important to figure out what you don't want to do as it is to figure out what you do want to do.
Yeah, for sure. Yes. I'd like to design handbags too.
I love it. I think they call it what, like a Renaissance man. I don't really like the term, but like where you do everything, like you just do a little bit of everything. Yeah. I love it.
Yes. In my heaven, I would have a team, and I would just be able to go into work on Mondays and say, okay, we're going to design handbags this week. This is my design. We need to get this to market. So here you go. Right. Just play with all that stuff. Right. And, is that going to happen anytime soon? I don't think so. But
right.
I think it's that follow the thread. Right. So
that's what the thing I think I like most about your story is following your kind of instincts on what you want to do and not letting anything stop you. Like just because you already have a painting business doesn't mean you can't open another business, or that you can't design handbags or furniture. Like you just don't let those things stop you. And I think that's something that gets kind of taught nowadays too, is you have to have like one focus. You have to be really good at one thing, whereas you can be good at multiple things, and you can kind of make your own way too. You don't have to wait for somebody to give it to you.
Would be to get good at one thing before moving on to the next thing.
Yeah.
Right. Like there's no way I could have done all of this when I was starting my house painting company. It required too much of my attention. Right. But when it got to the place where my son was working for me and he was running the crews and I had that space, that's when I can open something else up. Right.
Right.
And we're opening another division in the province next to us for the painting, but there are people there that are going to run it. And so it's not a huge strain on me. It doesn't require a lot of my time. If they need something, they ask me, we problem solve, they go back to running the business. And so there's lots of ways around it, but I definitely say get good at something. I have a huge, what I call a parking lot, where all of my ideas go. So that's where my food trade show is. That's where my furniture making is. That's where all of those things are. And then when I have space in my life, I can go to this list and go, what resonates with me? What should I do now? And I think we have to get better at following our intuition. I've just listed and sold we got offers in a couple of rental properties that I own, and like far cry from being on welfare. Like, let me tell you, but there is no reason why I should be selling them, but it just feels like the right thing to do. It feels like something I need to do. And so we have to pay attention to that. We know.
Yeah. So my last question is, you've already touched on a lot of different advice in here, but I usually just end with, what advice would you give people just starting out or just trying to figure out where to go?
I think my biggest piece of advice is to let people know that they are inherently worthy by the very fact that they are alive. You were born a miracle. Nobody looks at a baby and goes, oh yeah, not a miracle. We don't do that, right? So somebody looked at you at one time in your absolute perfectness and thought, whoa, what a miracle. That makes you inherently worthy, which means that the choices that you are making, if you can align with that worth, will be the absolute right choices for you.
It's really good advice.
Thanks.
So where can people find you? I know you have a podcast. Where can they find that? Any websites? How do people find?
Yeah, dominothinking.com. It's an
Okay,
easiest thing. My social media is on there. And most importantly, my contact information is on there. So if any of your listeners have a question about anything, if anything I've said has touched a nerve or given you hope about something, hit me up. Like, I answer all of my emails, and I am really happy to help anybody along their journey in any way I can.
that's fantastic. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you for listening to the Career Journey Podcast. Head over to our website at careerjourneypodcast.com for more information and the latest episodes. See you next time.